say, the context in which we might enhance and advance science and technology cooperation. The specific question that I would like to put forward is whether or not science and technology cooperation can help us to build a more balanced economic partnership between Europe and China. And my instant answer is that it depends. And that we should not limit the discussion today to just science and technology, but that we definitely have to take into consideration the economic circumstances in which the different dialogues, partnerships and initiatives at the level of science and technology unfold. It depends on whether a more equal playing field allows innovators from both China and the European Union to thrive, and also very importantly to commercialize their inventions and to become globally successful. I think that's really critical. It's not just about exchanging technologies, it's also about developing a level playing field, fair market that allows European and Chinese entrepreneurs alike to flourish and to profit. If we try to take stock of what the S&T cooperation between China and Europe at this moment entails, there is a very positive element to it, from a European perspective at least. We are still very much on the upper hand when it comes to reaping revenues out of intellectual property. We have an annual surplus in trade in intellectual property with China to the tune of 3 billion euros. And I think that's an encouraging element from Europe's side. It still shows that Europe has a lot of know-how to offer that is economically important to China. Yet, on the other hand, we also see that when it comes to, as I already mentioned, commercializing know-how and technology, that we are into difficulties, that we are in a growing deficit with China, and that this deficit is definitely a significant loss on our current account. And I think this is the core of the problem. Europe is still good at many things. I think Europe is still a very capable innovator. Complementary, I believe, most of the times with China, but where it goes wrong, I believe, is in our ability to actually harness these strengths to the benefit of the 500 million European citizens, and to make sure that our innovative capacity helps us to address some of the difficulties that sprang from the Eurozone crisis and still affect many households in our society. And I think this is also the explanation why in the recent communication of the European Commission the need for a more balanced partnership was stressed several times. The EU aims to ensure reciprocity and a level playing field in all aspects of its trade and investment relationship with China. This is not an unimportant sentence. It's certainly not an unimportant sentence because we made that statement many, many times throughout the last 10 years. I recollect still a discussion with Holslag, the poor guy is still in prison, and Peter Mandelson, the trade commissioner at that time, about the state of the partnership. Both then promised we will work towards Europe, we'll work with Europe towards a strong and balanced economic partnership. That was after the European Commission for the first time raised the fact that we were incurring a growing trade deficit. But what has happened since is that the trade deficit, or the loss on the current account, which is a bit broader, also includes services and investment incomes, has not really reduced. Actually, the deficit on the current account with China is still at about the same level as in 2006. And I think this is startling. This is problematic. We are in Brussels and in many capital of the European member states discussing how we can generate the investment to make sure that we can combat unemployment, that we can restore confidence amongst European citizens. And there is the perspective of a 1 trillion euros investment fund for infrastructure. Yet at the same time we see that the accumulated loss on the current account in the last 10 years equals more or less that amount. So I think that in the long run, politically and economically, this kind of partnership is not sustainable. Also in 2006, the ever soft-spoken Prime Minister Wen Jiabao came to Brussels with the promise that his administration would work much harder to rebalance the Chinese economy. And that was important for us. That was important for us because a balanced Chinese economy would inevitably be more stable and would be a beacon of prosperity in the world economy. But it would also come with a stronger domestic market, with more internal growth and hence more opportunities for European companies, for exporters, to level out the deficit that we have, that we incurred for so many years. But then again, we see that actually the opposite has happened. Instead of rebalancing, Chinese economy has grown more imbalanced. Even with a new powerful leader coming in, President Xi and his team, China has not really delivered on rebalancing its economy. And that is, of course, the context in which we see the development of new science and technology policies, in which we see the development of science and technology policies that will not necessarily limit these problems of overinvestment and the overcapacity as a result, but that risk, if they are not properly implemented, to shift today's problems of overcapacity from what the Chinese government usually calls backward industries to advanced industries. And we're already seeing it beginning. If you take into consideration, for instance, renewable energy sector, capacity utilization rates, so the total of the capacity of the industry actually being used, has dropped from about 85% in 2000 to 67% last year. And you see that problem now also manifesting itself in certain more advanced components of the chemical industry. So you see, I believe that innovation for China is truly important. And I think China is definitely entitled to try to catch up with others. But trying to catch up in a context of oversupply and overinvestment, I think, could be destabilizing for the Chinese economy and hence detrimental to the interests of the Chinese citizens themselves, but certainly also to the 500 million citizens of the European Union. What affects us the most is that especially China's manufacturing sector is becoming more and not less dependent on exports. Usually the Chinese government comes to us with this observation that the current account surplus has gone down and that this showcases the rebalancing of the Chinese economy, but effectively what happens is that Chinese factories export more and that this is offset to some extent by growing imports of commodities. Now, what is again startling is that this export dependency is not any longer just a problem of flat glass producers, cement producers, steel producers, and textiles. We see, as I already mentioned it, relocating or moving it up higher on the value chain, spreading to renewable energy, car parts, advanced electronics, machinery, and so forth. So innovation tied to such a policy and such an economic structure comes to Europe not necessarily as a blessing, I would say more as a challenge. And that has to do, of course, with the fact that China's economic policy is not just confined to its pursuit of innovation. It's not just trying to gain market share, which again is a very legitimate objective, by being creative. I think what still accounts for most of China's gains in the global markets is what I usually call financial capital attrition. That is to order and instruct its policy banks to finance industries, state-owned, not state-owned, to the degree that we can no longer compete. If we take this chart, I think it's really staggering, the figures that we see. In 2014, China granted export credits to its companies to the tune of 180 billion US dollars. 180 billion US dollars. That's more than the export credit of the United States, Japan, South Korea, and the European member states together. Now, much of this export credit and concession loans is getting tied now to what China calls technology-intensive sectors. And again, you see the renewables, you have the bullet trains, and so forth. So China is shifting the application of those trade support tools from, again, basic industries to advanced industries. And I think this also has a significance in the context of new policies, like the Belt and Road policy of President Xi. The Belt and Road policy of President Xi, as I read it from the COFAs, the opinions of the State Council, is more of a continuation of the old export and industry promotion policies than something completely new. And what does that mean from a European perspective, Belt and Road policy? Is it about mutually beneficial cooperation? In fact, what we see thus far is not only that European countries along the Belt and Road have lost market share relatively, but that even core member states like France and Germany are losing in absolute terms. So in other words, I believe that one Belt and Road, as it is implemented, and as it implies a continuation of this financial power politics, is something that Europe really has to come to grips with. And we have to understand how this is going to affect our position in the long run. Two salient examples are those, the photovoltaic and bullet trains. And why these examples? I think these were two clusters where Europe was leading, where when it comes to fundamental breakthroughs and applying them into commercial models, we were leading from the 90s up into the threshold of the 21st century. And then the tables turned. Why did they turn? Was it because China suddenly became more innovative? Because China's science and technology policies became more effective than ours? Obviously not. What made a difference, I think, in those two sectors is that China was very smart in using the size of its market to extract concessions from European companies, and then afterwards gearing these companies to conquer markets overseas by means mostly of financial tools than as a result of their technological prowess. And that, I think, is the essence of China's technology nationalism tied to industrial policy today. Then also, an important consequence of the policy that we just saw a few minutes ago is that they will, I would say, make the trend of dwindling export complementarity more pronounced. What is export complementarity? That is the degree to which our export composition differs. The more different exports, the less competition, the more similar, the more competition. This chart draws from over 5,000 of different export categories, so it's very fine-grained. And what we see actually is a sudden drop in complementarity. And then, of course, if we look at where we now stand today, we see that the division of labor is mostly a matter of China's specialization in telecom, in computers, in certain metal products, and Europe is drawing it mostly from cars, pharmaceuticals, and so forth. Then if we depart from the 10 pillar industries that China is seeking to develop, these are exactly the sectors in which we have a comparative advantage today. So the result of what China wants is that complementarity will diminish further and that competition will become more fierce. And I think that is not necessarily a bad thing that there is more competition, but competition must be fair. And if we compete about technology, then the competition should be about technology and not about export trade. And the competition should be about patents and intelligent researchers, and not about support to state-owned enterprises. And I think this is really critical. I think Europe can handle competition as long as it is taking place in a market that is open and free. How would I then link this to the more specific science and technology strategies that China is rolling out? And I was sincerely impressed by the two presentations this morning. But if I reconstruct what was said this morning from a European perspective, those presentations were not reassuring. They were not reassuring at all. Because essentially what they said to me was that China is going to, as it did with trade, continue business as usual. Top-down steering, focus on national industries, national interest with even though it's mentioned in the margins from time to time, quite limited opportunities for foreign companies to benefit and to profit. President Xi made an explicit reference to the importance of indigenous development in the sector of aircraft engines. Again, a sector important to us. But if you read into the 13 five-year plans and many other documents that come out of the State Council and the NDRC, it applies to most other industries. Indigenous development. And that harks back to the comment that I made this morning. How can we make this fixation with indigenous development on the Chinese side compatible with Europe's aspiration to have S&T cooperation in a more open, equal environment, and an environment where the forces of the market decide how capital is allocated rather than security and economic concerns from the government. I think this tenacity of the idea of indigenous innovation and the pursuit of the development of national champions is not beneficial to Europe's interests. And I think will make it increasingly difficult for Europe to stick to its policy of openness and engagement towards China, especially if social challenges and pressures in our member states become bigger. I also think that there is still an issue with the technology transfer policies that the Chinese government is pursuing towards our companies. It suffices to read into the recent report of the EU-China Chamber of Commerce to have a bit of understanding what's happening. And this, again, does not really testify of a lot of recognition from the side of China to the many initiatives that the European Union has taken in the last decade to strengthen synergy when it comes to innovation and science and technology. A third element which I think Europe has to come to grips with is this phenomenon of lawfare and standard setting. Part of the One Belt and Road policy is to export Chinese standards. It's put black and white in different government papers. We cannot fault China again for doing that. It's a normal aspiration. But I think the nationalism with which these policies are formulated are again out of sync with what Europe tends to stand for in international governance. So then, how do we go from here? I think that from our viewpoint, Europe has to understand that what China is doing comes at a risk. I, for one, understand very well why China is pursuing certain policies. It stems from a feeling of insecurity. It stems from a feeling that it has to catch up with the developed countries. But again, standing in a position as an academic paid by European taxpayers, I think the consequences that we draw from it are not always so positive. And I think there is a serious risk for Europe that if it, as the only major economy, sticks to openness, it might actually end up between a rock and a hard place. With China challenging through its S&T policies more of our lower-end industries, and the United States with a new president who is inevitably going to resort more to statecraft, affecting our companies at the top end. So what can be done? I think the essence, and this is really the takeaway of the presentation, is that S&T cooperation needs to be embedded in a level playing field with regard to trade and industrial policy. Without fair competition, it's to no avail from our viewpoint to continue to invest millions, tens of millions in all sorts of synergies. I think China must also understand that it cannot have it both ways. That it cannot go on with its fixation on technology nationalism and relative gains, yet on the other hand also desire for stable and open partnerships. I think some consistency is inevitable in the coming years. If those conditions are fulfilled, I think the road is wide open for many more initiatives and for deepening synergy. We can enhance the mobility of researchers, for instance, with Chinese researchers having access to our core laboratories, which is the case already today, but the other way around, also European researchers having access to what China considers to be strategic research programs, which is not the case today. We can also move ahead with joint research and development investment funds, support startups together, joint technology development fund. All these initiatives, and many of them were mentioned already this morning, can be considered. But I don't think that we can continue with this unbalanced partnership, with us opening up, with Europe sharing whatever it has, and with China still sticking to policies that date from the 19th century. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. I deliberately try to be straightforward and perhaps a little bit provocative. But this discussion, and also the discussion in the workshops after my presentation, cannot take place in a void. Science and technology is part of a much bigger arena, a much bigger context, a much more complicated context that we have to understand if we want to make sense of all these promising concrete initiatives that you might elaborate on in the coming minutes. So that was my presentation. Thanks.
We have some time for your precious question. Please feel free to ask questions.
Absolutely interesting, your presentation. Based on your conclusions, it seems that there could be more room for cooperation on basic research than on, let's say, technological or go-to-market research. Basic research is fair. What do you think about it?
Can you repeat that question, because I didn't read that?
Based on your conclusions and your all your elements, there seems that there is more room for cooperating on basic research than on other topics, applied research, development, technological applications.
At this moment, this might be, let's say, one of the instant conclusions, but I don't think it's acceptable. We cannot afford this cherry picking where we allow the Chinese to come to us to cooperate on fundamental research and cheat the market when it comes to applied research. So again, it's a matter of reciprocity, and the Chinese, when it comes to economic policy, external economic policy, are very good at linkaging. That is to extract certain concessions in return for investment or financial support and so forth. And I believe we should do the same. If they want to work with us on fundamental research, fine. The more the better. But then we have certain concerns and certain expectations, and those are going to have to be fulfilled if it really has to if it really is going to be productive. So perhaps we should learn a bit from China's economic diplomacy when it comes to linking and tying things up, and do it the same way.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you. Well, it was some nice and interesting stuff here, and I mean, what you say, I must say that this is what is happening maybe, but this is what maybe, if I go back to the last slide that it was before that, the game theory, we are in a balance here, and I can see that China, what you said, has its own objectives, and this is fair, because every country wants to develop and be successful, and this is the case for Europe. And I cannot blame either side. I think what is important, and I'm going back to the game theory, in order to be successful in this game of, you know, both sides that they have maybe different objectives or maybe the same objective, it's first to know each other, to know what the other wants, and so it's very good that we understand what is the objectives of China, but also China understand what the European Union is also willing to achieve. So this is the first step. The second step is to have a strategy and follow the strategy. Otherwise, at some point of this game, you will lose without a strategy. And I must say, and this is maybe something we should take care of. I mean, I think China has done a good job having a stable strategy. I don't know if this strategy is going to be successful or not, nobody knows. This is going to be known after some years. But this is the first step, to have a strategy. And I think this is what maybe European countries or as a union we miss. To have a clear strategy, what we want and how we can proceed better. And maybe some of the things you said could be part of this strategy.
I think that's a very fair comment, and I think we get to understand to some extent what China's policies are about. At least having listened to the first two speakers this morning, I think they paint a very, very clear picture of what China's policies are all about. But then if you continue from your logic and you say, okay, first we have to understand and then to adjust our policy, well, the bearings of that are going to be quite significant, because if China sticks to those policies, we don't have much options but to become more mercantilistic and nationalistic ourselves, unless China is going to do what it has promised now for many years and to open up and rebalance and so forth. I think the consequence of what you say, if China sticks to its position, is a form of technological protectionism, which is bad and which we should avoid. And which China should understand that it's in its interest also to avoid. But then also, I believe that the Chinese leadership has to come to a much better understanding that it has to move much faster and move to a genuine policy of win-win and fairness.
Thank you. Thank you. Your presentation was great in order to try to contribute to the dialogue. I suppose that China and Europe are in completely different stages of economic development. And as we saw in previous presentations, China is catching up quite faster. It accelerates. Nowadays in Europe, the discussion is that innovation, as we know it nowadays, does not provide us with the growth we want. It promotes inequality. Trying to have a more clear cooperation, let's say, with Europe and China, we could provide the lessons we learned already, that innovation itself in research and technological development does not promote growth, but you need something more that we can teach. So in this way, we can integrate other issues into the research agenda. And it will be a win for us as well, because there are space for trade agreements and stuff like that, let's say, there as well. I suppose that we try to contribute economic policy with research agenda, and this is the main gain for Europe.
Yeah, I love your suggestion that innovation shouldn't be exclusively technological. In fact, what we need in the world, and we discussed it a few minutes before the talk, is much more social innovation, right? That is re-engineering society so that they feel more satisfied and have less an inclination to vote for all kinds of strange politicians, so to speak. So it shouldn't be exclusively technological, but I think when it comes to social innovation, Europe is not doing that badly at all. There is a lot of grassroots experimenting in different member states, different cities. There is now the Commission enrolling different initiatives, smart city development, and so forth. So on that side, I completely agree with you. That it shouldn't be exclusively about technological innovation. Yet, I believe that what we have to aim at is a form of what I usually call enlightened power politics. What the focus of economic power politics is not productivity or technology per se, that's the well-being of the society, but it still requires that a government, a polity, prevents others from swindling. prevents others from undermining prosperity, which, with all due respect, China is doing at the moment. So we have to combine the two. It's about ideals and norms, but at the same time, it's about knowing how to play the power politics more the old-fashioned way.
This brings me to a very interesting point. Today there were a lot of times, or was a lot of times mentioned, the third industrial revolution. And actually this is a best-selling book of Mr. Jeremy Rifkin, an advisor to more than 120 governments all over the globe in the technology. He wrote the books about nanotechnology, biotechnology, and now a book about the third industrial revolution. But you know what his first book was? In the 80s, 90s? This was, the first bestseller was about how to differentiate Europe and the US. In the US, you have the dream becoming the richest and the most powerful person in the world. And everybody can become more rich and powerful. Like the US guys have the philosophy, he said in his book, I am the best, fuck the rest. His book's name was The European Dream. And the European Dream he defined as what the Commission has also in the Commission papers and in the Lisbon Code formally, it's the social cohesion. And I think this is very much something also in common, what China needs to have. Wealth for not just a few people in China, but wealth in terms of a social cohesion. We have one more question.
Not a question, just a little comment. I think you used the word independent innovation. I think this is not exactly correct. Independent innovation should be translated to indigenous innovation. Because for example, when we in 2006, when we before we published the long-term, the middle-term science and technology development program to 2020, we mentioned that phrase, indigenous innovation. What does that mean? At that time, President Hu Jintao, he said, well, how to describe the innovative country? I think if you can see many foreign scientists and entrepreneurs in China everywhere, that means innovative country. So that something indigenous innovation, that means the domestic innovation. That's not you can attract everywhere globally resources, innovation resources, create value in China. So to my personal dreams, I think my personal dreams is China in the future as an innovative country is that mean a globally platform for innovation. That everybody, every company have fair opportunity and a chance to create new value here. Or I think the innovation to the definition is a combination of elements. So if the broad is more broader, that means the opportunity of innovation successfully is more bigger. So the open is the inner sense of the innovation.
Can I briefly, I love your statement, and I think that
This is
I'm sorry. A laudable position.
And second, when you mention the export, you must mention the whole Asia industrial zone. China is not so independent. It's one chain of the Asia manufacturing. So our profit rate when we export one product only about 2 or 3%. So most components come from the Asian other places, but they're all concentrated in China to export to Europe or to USA. So this is difficult. you can just look in China. So you may be, if you only look in China and Europe, just doesn't mean assume in this globe just only two players, one Europe, one China. So the imbalance will be enlarged. But when you see there are so many players in the globe, that's totally different. Because China is not competing with Europe. We compete with Mexico, Brazil, and other developing countries. Because we are the same level of the division of labor. Our ability is similar. But the European ability is totally different than us. So how do you go faster than USA and Japan? That's your challenge. You cannot competing faster with China. Because we have another competing with other players, totally different.
So very, very briefly, I wish the government would have adopted our advice when it comes to indigenous development, but essentially what has started with, if I'm not mistaken, the 9th five-year plan is a completely different approach. Essentially what the 9th five-year plan stated is that China at that stage was too dependent on foreign know-how, or foreign technology, right? With the explicit purpose to replace, and that word was used several times in that section, to replace foreign know-how with Chinese solutions, right? So that's completely different from what you say. Wu Bangbo, if I recollect, stated it at the national conference that China has a mission to replace the Boeings and the Airbuses from this world with Chinese equivalents. First for the Chinese market, he said, then for the world. So again, I completely understand where this comes from. China comes from a very, very difficult century. A century of famine, a century of revolution and instability. And it doesn't want to go back. But I think it also must learn to look at it from the viewpoint of the others. Like we too in Europe have many poor people. It suffices to go to Romania or to go to Greece or even the suburbs of Brussels to understand that we too are in need and have to fight for certain economic interest. Second, when it comes to China in the broader Asian context, I think China is creating itself a problem, and I discussed that yesterday with some people at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What China is doing, perhaps not deliberately, is to force all its neighbors, except three, into a role of commodity supply. If you see how regional specialization develops, it's China is doing the manufacturing and the others are supplying not the microchips and so forth, but the oil and ores and the agricultural goods. The impact of, for instance, the comprehensive economic agreement with ASEAN, I think speaks for itself. Since basically what has been growing in terms of ASEAN exports is not high-tech, but it's agricultural goods. What has growing from China is high-tech manufacturing goods. And that creates political friction. So I believe, and that's a message that I have sought to convey to Chinese diplomats, that essentially China's pursuit of a peaceful life, of a harmonious environment, is incompatible with its economic agenda. And that it will pay a heavy political price if it continues with those policies.